Hello and welcome to another video of the project management training series. And this video is all about the project network diagram and the critical path analysis. So in this video, the first thing that we will see is what is the definition of the project network diagram. Then we will see how to create the project network diagram based on the activities and the dependencies. And once you will create your project network diagram, then you will be able to determine the project critical path. And the critical path obviously is the time required in order to create your project. So these are the three important things that you will be working on as part of this video. And then once you have determined your critical path, you will be able to define your project schedule. So that is the agenda for this video, and let's start. So the first thing we have is that what is project network diagram? Okay, so the project network diagram is simply the sequence of all of your project activities. So once you have defined your activities, they are currently in a list. So once you have your activities and once you have defined the dependencies and the relationships among those activities, now you need to put all of those activities in order, in sequence. So once you will sequence your activities, you will end up with a diagram, and that is what we call the project network diagram. So network diagram, it is the sequence that how your activities will be executed during the execution of the project. So that is basically the order of execution from start to finish for all of your project activities. Then we will go into the details of the project critical path. So the critical path is only possible to determine once you have defined the project network diagram. So again, if you don't have the network diagram, you cannot determine the project critical path. So the critical path is going to be the longest path in your network diagram, and the critical path determines that how long your project will take to finish. So the duration of the critical path is the duration of the project. So these are the first two definitions, and again in the next slide we will go into the details, and then that will give you the better understanding about the network diagram and about the critical path analysis. So first of all, again, the project network diagram. So once you have defined your project activities and you have determined the dependencies among those activities, it's time to draw the project network diagram. So again, the project network diagram, it shows the sequenced order of your project activities, and that is how your project will execute from start till finish of the whole duration. And then once you have defined the project network diagram, only then you will be able to determine the project critical path. So the critical path again will help you to determine that how long your whole project will take from start to finish. Okay. So you can see on the right side, that is how the project network diagram will look like. So instead of having all of your activities in a list, once you sequence your activities, you will end up with this network diagram, which is on the right side of the screen. And then based on this network diagram, you will determine the critical path of the project. So again, the critical path of the project is only possible to calculate once you have the project network diagram. And again, whatever is the duration of the critical path, that is going to be the duration of your project as well. And the critical path again is the shortest or the minimum time required in order to complete the project. Another important term, that is the float. Okay. Now float basically is the amount of time an activity can be delayed without delaying the project. Okay. So float is basically a very good thing if you have a float on any particular activity. So as a project manager, you can make use of the float in different ways. And float is also only possible to calculate once you have determined the critical path and the project network diagram. So once you have the network diagram, once you have the critical path, only then you can calculate the float. So you can now see that you can now visualize that having the project network diagram gives you lots of benefits. Number one, it is the only way to calculate the critical path, and the critical path is the only way to help you to determine the duration of the project. And once you have the critical path, only then you can calculate the float of your project as well. Alright guys, so let's say We have here different activities, activity A, B, C, and so on. So we have here 6, 7 different project activities which you define as part of your project. Then once you have defined your project activities, then you determine the dependencies among those activities. So for example, activity B depends on activity A, activity C also depends on activity A. Now here one thing is important here, that the relationship which we are using is finish to start, which means in order to start activity B, activity A has to be finished first. In order to start activity C, activity A again has to be finished first. Then in the third column we have the duration of each and every activity. So let's say these are the duration in days or months, whatever time unit you want to use. So for example, activity A will take 5 days, activity B will take 8 days, and so on. So here we have all the information that we need in order to create the project network diagram and to calculate the critical path of our project. Okay, now before we continue, we have the duration for all of the activities. And now if we just take the total of all of these durations, for example, your project manager, let's say your manager or the client needs to know that what is going to be the duration of the whole project, and you have here the duration of individual activities. Now if you just take the total of all of these individual duration for all of these activities, the total you will get is 36 days. Okay. Now this is not going to be the exact or the accurate duration of your project. Although the total is 36, that is correct, but that is not the right or the exact duration of your project, because to determine the duration of the project you must have to calculate the critical path. Okay. So now let's continue and let's see. So again, that is the wrong duration. To have the right duration of the project, you must have to have the network diagram and the critical path. So let's continue and see that how to create the project network diagram. Now based on the same information that you had in the previous slide, we will now be creating the project network diagram. Okay. So we will start with the start of the project from the left side, and we are moving towards the right side of the project, which means we are moving towards the finish of the project. So as you will start your project, the first activity, as per the chart that we saw in the previous slide, the first activity that you will begin with is going to be activity A, and activity A will take 5 days. Okay. Then after activity A, you will have activity B, and activity B will take 8 days. Another activity we had was activity C, but that also depends on activity A, which means C will also come after activity A. Okay. And activity C will take 7 days. Okay. So we are basically following the chart that we saw in the previous slide. So we have all of the activities and the dependencies, and as per those dependencies, we are just putting all of the activities in the right order. Okay. So if we continue, the next activity after activity B, we have activity D, and that activity will take 2 days. After D, we will have activity E, which will take 3 days. After E, we have activity which is activity F, and that will take 6 days. Now if you look at the chart, you will see that activity F depends on activity E and C, which means to start activity F, activity C and E both have to finish first. So you can see how activity F will come after C and E both. And then the last thing we have is activity G, and activity G depends on F, and activity G will take 5 days. And these are all the activities for our project, and then we will have the finish of the project. So we can see here that the project network diagram, it flows from start of the project towards the finish of the project, from the left side towards the right side. And we can see here the dependencies among the activities, because the arrow represents the dependency, that which activity depends on which other activity. Okay, so here we have the project network diagram with all of their durations. And now we will see how to calculate the critical path. Okay. Now in order to calculate the critical path, we need to first see that how many paths there are. Alright, now the first path in this network diagram we have is from start A, B, D, E, F, G towards the finish. So that is the first path we have in the network diagram. Alright, now if we write down all of the activities which are on path number 1, so we have A, B, D, E, F and G on path number 1, and if we add up all of the durations on this particular path for all of these activities, so 5 plus 8 plus 2 and so on, so we will get the total of 29 days. So that is our path number 1, which is equal to 29 days. Now we will see that what other path exist in the project network diagram. So the other path which we have is start A, C, then going towards F, G and finish. So that is the second path we have in the project network diagram. And so path number 2 is A, C, F, G, and if we add up all of the durations for activities on path number 2, the total we will get is 23 days. Alright, so in this small example we have only 2 paths. You may have more than one path, maybe 5, 6, 10 paths on big projects. So here we have only 2 paths, and the purpose or the thing that we are trying to figure out is that what is the critical path of this project network diagram. Now remember, the critical path is the longest path in terms of duration, not in terms of number of activities. So we have to see that which path is the longest duration path. So we have 2 paths, one is 29 days, the other one is 23 days. So of course the longer one is 29 days. Okay, so the critical path is the one which is longest in terms of duration. So in this case, the critical path is path number 1, which is A, B, D, E, F, G. So that is the critical path, and the duration of the critical path is 29 days, which means that is how long our project will take, 29 days, because it is the critical path, or it is the duration of the critical path. So simply whatever the duration of the critical path, that is the duration of your project. Okay, so now I hope now it is very much clear that how you will be creating the project network diagram based on the activities and the dependencies, and how you will determine different paths in the network diagram, and how you can determine the critical path. Alright guys, so that is how we will be creating the project network diagram based on the activities and the dependencies. And we have seen how to calculate the project critical path, and based on this information we will now be creating the project schedule once we have determined the total duration of our project. And again, float is also possible to be calculated once you have the project network diagram and the critical path analysis. Alright, so let's move on to the next video and see that how can we develop the detailed schedule based on all the information. So see you in the next video.